My name is Lou Mignani, and this is going to be my testimony on the slate quarry exemption to Act 250. I live in Wells, which is right in about the middle of the Slate Valley, which runs from West Paulet to West Castleton, approximately right on the New York-Vermont border. And Wells is in the middle. I'm going to try to make this concise, and I'll try to substantiate what I say with some pictures, and you can just stop this video, take a look at a URL, and verify what I'm saying to make sure of the accuracy. Okay, so I want to start with a little history. The slate quarry exemption, as originally conceived, was understandable as well as being problematic. As you can see, the proposal as introduced would allow slate quarries that were being worked when Act 250 went into effect to continue their operations without going through the permitting process. I see this as understandable because everyone who owned property adjacent to a working quarry was well aware of it. But it was also problematic because it conflicted with the purpose of Act 250. Something which the people of this area were not meant to be exempted from. But the bill grandfathering existing quarries eventually morphed into an opportunity for anybody who had an old slate quarry on their property to register it with the state and have it exempted along with the active quarries. This was completed in '96 and allowed people to register any such existing quarry hole and have it exempted from Act 250. And the bill as passed regarded very little activity as substantial enough to warrant an Act 250 permit. In 1997, I opposed one such registration by Northeast developers on the property bordering mine to the east. I was unsuccessful, but my opposition resulted in John Ewing personally inspecting the 5 proposed quarries to be registered. And to my astonishment, a hole about 10 foot by 15 foot was approved for exemption and considered to be a quarry held in reserve. I was dumbfounded by this whole process, but as the law was written, the Pafundi registration was as legitimate as any other and was approved. The end result left the slate industry virtually exempted from Act 250. I summarized this document requested from Bill Burke's office, listing all the quarries registered, and determined that over 400 quarries on more than 10,000 acres of land had been approved for exemption. The document is in PDF format and available from Bill Burke in Rutland if you want to verify this. All these quarries are mostly invisible from the main highways of the area like routes 30, 4A, and 22A. To see what has happened, you really have to get off the main highway and travel dirt roads or view it from the air using Google Earth. The lack of any recourse to Act 250 has negatively affected the quality of life and property values for a good many Vermonters who neighbor these quarries, myself included. I saw someone on a WCAX interview who represented the slate industry say something like, "If you buy a house next to a railroad track, you should expect to hear trains." Very smooth sounding analogy. But one more consistent with our reality would be more like buying a house next to an old cellar hole and seeing it turn into a Walmart. I bought my property before Act 250 and started building in 1971, the year it took effect. At that time, there were only a handful of Vermont quarries active within a mile of my house. The only one I was aware of really was Hilltop Slate. Since the exemption, there are countless quarries being operated within a mile of my house, and the quarries registered on the previously mentioned Pafundi lands have been opened and are working up to my border. It goes without saying that the value of my property is greatly diminished by the presence of these quarries, and in summer they can be operating from daylight till past dusk on any day, and this isn't a quiet operation. Shortly after Vermont passed Act 250, New York passed the Mined Land Reclamation Law of 1975. It establishes standard practices for mining and quarrying that include things that should be important to Vermonters. The miner needs a plan on a survey map, for one thing. There are 25-foot setbacks from roads, property lines, and wetlands. Rubble piles cannot exceed a 30-degree gradient. Quarries must cover rubble piles with lighter material that supports vegetation. Gates and walls must be erected to prevent people from dumping garbage into pits or accidentally falling into them. Working hours are established and warnings sounded before blasting, and monies must be escrowed to assure reclamation is completed when the quarry is left. These kind of standards are a far saner approach to regulating a strip mining industry to make it less disturbing, disruptive, and objectionable to its neighbors. No such standards exist in Vermont, and the industry practices vary from one owner to the next. Practices appear to be self-developed, and some are better than others. One quarrier might avoid filling wetlands with rubble, and another does not. If you take a ride on back roads around here, you can readily see wetlands being filled with rubble at many sites. These pictures are all taken from dirt roads between Wells and Fairhaven, and are only a sample of what is commonly being done. Regarding the gradient of rubble piles, I would say that with few exceptions, they are as high and as steep as they can be made. This first picture is of a town road in Wells. It was marked as closed for many years as Hilltop Slate expanded into the existing road and left the new road it created in such bad condition it was impassable to most vehicles. In 2014, for whatever reasons, two neighboring slate companies recreated the town road on the rubble pile you saw in the previous picture. Wells then graveled and graded it. The gradient of the piles above and below this new road is clearly well in excess of 30 degrees, and that's typical. In contrast to what you've been seeing, this is a picture of a site owned by Newmont Slate on Route 149 in West Pollock. Here, reclamation has taken place. And if memory serves me, what we are looking at was once open pits and rubble piles, and is now storage, parking, and not at all unsightly. Why Newmont has filled in old holes and graded rubble piles is unknown to me, but it's a rare sight here. As for setbacks from property lines, they only exist where a quarry chooses to do so, unless some local requirement exists. Since there is no uniform code or even a survey required, disputes have arisen as a result of rubble piles being placed over borders that perhaps weren't even agreed upon before dumping started. In this next picture, the people who lived at this house brought suit against the company that dumped slate onto their land, and at present the rubble pile goes almost to their border and continues to get higher each year. With respect to any concern for aesthetics, cleanliness, or regard for the environment, it goes without saying that, again, this is an individual thing. Because there is no uniform code and no oversight at these quarries, they do as they wish, and the people who see what they do have come to regard it as the norm. There is so much dumping of rubble going on, a multitude of sins can be covered with one load of rubble. Nevertheless, much of it is just left open to plain view, and the average local like myself has been conditioned to ignore it. What is happening now isn't just going to affect the people of this area. The boom that is taking place now in the industry will one day pass, and left in its wake will be countless pits, filled with water and connected by roads accessible to vehicles. It would be incredibly naive to think that people won't use them for recreation and dumping sites. They have in the past, they are now, and they will in the future. I tried unsuccessfully to find articles from the Rutland Herald concerning dumping into quarries, but they're on microfiche and not readily accessible. But I clearly recall that a neighbor of mine was caught allowing tire companies to dump used tires in a quarry pit. My town used a quarry filled with water as the official town dump for many years before and after I came here, and many others have been used unofficially as dumps. A native Vermonter once warned some of us swimming in a roadside quarry that it had been used as a dump when he was a kid. What these pictures show is just a small sampling of the accessibility to these pits and some of what is taking place as we speak. When the quarry stopped working, activities died down, and posted signs fade and the gates are unhinged, is when the real industrial strength damage is going to occur. The problems experienced by people living near quarries would not be happening if we had restrictions similar to New York. Dangerous rubble piles would be graded and covered with vegetation. Pits would be filled with rubble or permanently obstructed to discourage dumping. And possibly the most important change would be in the attitude of citizens towards the quarries, their uses and abuses. You may consider it speculation, but the people I speak with will not raise issues with quarriers. There is a fear of reprisals, a very real fear, and a sense that they have all the power and we have none. They're mostly right because the legislature has provided this exemption. That's about all I have to say, and I truly hope that this legislature is persuaded by the testimonies you've heard to remedy a problem that was created by the slate quarry exemption. Thank you very much for hearing me out, and please do something to remedy this.